Okay, welcome to the second of this series of videos where I'm looking at this lovely Sanyo VTC-MH5 Japanese Betamax machine. At the end of the last video I'd basically got the machine working, but the cassette wasn't quite managing to go all the way down as it was inserted, and I strongly suspect that's because the loading belt, or the belt that drives that loading mechanism, has gone slack. So what I'm going to do in this video is attempt to replace that belt. Now, I can't use the trick of passing a long screwdriver through the machine in this particular machine because there's bits of chassis in the way. So what I'm going to have to do is remove the entire cassette cradle mechanism, which is something I've never done before. I can't find any service information for this model specifically, or the VTC-M50, which I believe to be the PAL version of this machine, but the other VTC-M models I've managed to find the relevant page in the service manual that tells you how to take that cradle out, and I'm hoping that's going to be the same as this VTC-MH5. But before I attempt that on this machine, which is a nice machine, I'm going to use sort of what I'm calling a scrap machine, but it's not really, because it's actually a pretty good machine. It's a VTC-M20, and all that's wrong with it really is there's a few bits of its idler assembly missing. Apart from that, it's a fully working machine, so I'm not going to call it a scrap machine because it isn't really, because I do intend to fix this machine up, but it's kind of less important than the MH5 at the moment. So I'm just going to use this as a practice machine just to see how these instructions work. So let's crack on with that. Okay, this is the machine I'm going to be practicing removing the cassette cradle on. It's a VTC-M20. It's actually the one I was working on in a previous video, which has some parts of its idler assembly missing. And I've just been having a look. The instructions for removing the cradle tell you there's 6 screws that need to be removed, 2 of which are accessed by manually pushing the cassette cradle forward. And I've noticed on this machine those 2 screws are missing. So someone's already really had a go at this machine. But nevertheless, we shall crack on. I'll remove the front panel first. The instructions say to leave this top plate in place, and all the screws are accessible without removing this top plate, so we'll do that. Let's do this in the correct order as per the instruction sheet. So the first ones we remove are the 2 towards the back of the machine. So there's one down there. Annoyingly, this screwdriver isn't magnetic, so I'm going to have to try and fish that out. There's one screw. And the second screw is down here. Second of those 2, I should say. So I'm going to find a magnetic screwdriver. Okay, this screwdriver is magnetic. This should make the job much easier. There we are. It's the second screw out. Now I'm going to have to get this circuit board out of the way, because parts of this cradle go underneath that board, so we'll just remove the 2 screws to flip that out of the way. Actually, that screw needs to come out as well. That will need to come out. In fact, I probably need to take this screening panel off as well, so I'll do that. Right, now the next 2 screws that need to come out are accessible through these holes here. Yeah, this would have been impossible without a magnetic screwdriver actually, so I can't actually even see whether I'm getting the screwdriver in the head of the screw. Ah, got it. That screw, is that the same as the others? No, it's not. Different screw. But knowing what this machine's been through, that could well be the wrong screw for there anyway. Ah! Drop the screw down inside. Anyway, hopefully that'll be easy to fish out once I've got the deck out. Now, normally at this point you'd have to move the cassette mechanism forwards, which would give access to another 2 screws down through these holes. But as I say, those 2 screws have already been taken out, so at this point we should be able to lift the cassette cradle out. And this tuner board is getting in the way, so I expected that might happen. Not quite sure what the correct method for removing this board is. Is that just going to get out of the way enough to... Yeah, there we go. Just push that over there. Oh, you couldn't see that, sorry. Now, there it is, it's out. Disconnect that wire from the motor, and we have the entire cradle mechanism out. So that was actually relatively easy, so now we can just another 2 screws to remove to gain access to the belt. Let's get that screw out that I dropped. Okay, that was fairly easy, wasn't it? So let's refit this one in here, because I'd never really needed to take this one out anyway. Now, it does say in the instructions, when installing the front loading mechanism to the chassis, install it so that the spring plate is held by the notched part. Spring plate held by the notched part. I haven't got a clue what that means. So let's just lower it in and see if it becomes apparent what that means. See, now that's gone back in, so what do they mean by that? Because I don't really understand that. Anyway, let's put it all back. So the first thing I'll do is, no I won't, I'll put the screws in first. So now this tuner board can go back. Plug the motor back in. Front panel back on. And we'll give it a try. Yeah, seems to work fine. Okay, so let's go for it on the MH5. First thing I'm going to do is remove the front panel again, because that just makes a lot of things much easier. Although in this particular case it's quite fiddly to get back on, I still think it's going to make the rest of the job so much easier. I will take it off. Now I'm going to refit this plate. Because all the screws you need to remove are accessible with this plate in place, and it just gives the whole thing a bit more rigidity. So I'll put this back on. Now, for some reason I forgot to talk while I was recording this section, so I'll just dub some commentary on at this point. I've just lifted that circuit board out of the way, and here I'm disconnecting all the wires from the tuner board at the front of the machine. They all need to come out because that circuit board needs to get out of the way in order to lift up the cassette carriage. Just releasing the clips there, and then slide that board backwards slightly, and it moves out of the way, and I think I've flapped it forward. Yeah, that's the easiest way to get it out of the way, was just flap it forward at that point. So now I'm disconnecting the wire from the motor. So I think the whole cassette carriage is free at this point, but what I hadn't noticed at this point was that there's an earth wire at the front, which I'll find out in a minute when I try to lift the cradle out. Firstly, I'm removing the first two screws, as I did on the previous machine. At this point I realised I need to remove the screening plate again over the top of the head and the mechanism. So that's just 3 screws to come out. And one at the front there. And then that screening plate lifts off. Now I can continue removing the screws that hold the cassette carriage. They're all quite tight, which suggests that this machine hasn't been tampered with before, which is always a good thing. Now the 2 screws towards the front of the deck. Managed not to drop it this time. I was blowing some dust off of that screw. That screw was covered in dust. And the other front screw. Again, managed not to drop it. And again, that one's covered in dust, so I just blew the dust off. Now the 2 that were missing from the other deck, accessible by manually moving the cassette cradle forward. It's tricky to get on the screw head with the screwdriver because once you've put the screwdriver down the hole you can't see the head of the screw, so it's all got to be done by feel. So that's why it's a little bit tricky to actually get the screwdriver to engage in the screw. Again, managed to avoid dropping it. I'm just shining a torch down just so I can see where the screw head is, and I found I had to use a slightly thinner screwdriver for this one because the thick one I was using before, there's a little piece of mechanism that remains slightly obscuring the top of the screw head. Even with that cassette cradle pushed forward, there's still a little bit of metal in the way, so I had to use a thin screwdriver to get to this one. Rather than fish it out, I think I just chose to leave it in there while I lifted the cassette cradle out, which I'm doing now. And I think it's at this point I discovered that there was an earth wire connected to the front. An earth wire at the front here. So I just moved that circuit board out of the way to release that earth wire. Then the whole cradle lifts out. And I retrieve the screw that I left in place. Put that to one side. So now I can undo the screw that holds the bracket, that holds the loading motor onto the side of the cassette cradle. I won't take that all the way out because loosening it is enough to just push that motor out of the way in order to get the belt out, as you'll see here. So if I unhook the belt, I can then push the motor away from the side of the mechanism. That gives enough clearance then to pull the belt out. And similarly to push the new belt in, which I did with a flat-bladed screwdriver. And just finish off with the tweezers. Yeah, that's gone through, so now I can hook it over the pulleys. Apologies, my hand got in the way there, but that's just pushing the belt over the two pulleys and then just spin them round manually to make sure it's on nicely, and then just tighten up that screw again. That screw was very tight, so I did it similarly tight when I was tightening it back up. So it's now just a question of replacing the cradle in the machine. Bit of fumbling to get it lined up, but once it's lined up, it just drops into position. Now replacing the two screws that were missing from the other machine. They can go back in again by pushing the cradle forward manually. I'm just shining the torch through a handy hole there, so try and give me a little bit of visibility of the hole to make it slightly easier to get the screw in, but I don't think it really helped. And now the two screws towards the front of the deck go back in. Again, it's quite tricky because the screwdriver gets in the way of visibility of the hole, so you have to kind of guess by feel where the actual hole is. That's just checking that the mechanism is all working fine. And the other screw at the front. Two screws towards the back of the cradle. These are much easier because it's easy to see the holes and the screws. I actually think it might have been easier to have removed that top plate because it just would have made it easier to see the screws, but the instructions tell you to leave that in place, so I did. Now I'm reconnecting the wire to the motor. Replacing the tuner circuit board. I did remember to reconnect that earth wire at the front of the deck. So that just clips back in under its supports. And then reconnect all the wiring to that circuit board. Not that the tuner is ever likely to be used again on this machine, but might as well reconnect it all. Right, let's reassemble the machine. Okay, I've rather optimistically put the machine back together and put the casing back on, assuming this is going to work. So let's get the Variac going. Variac is outputting 101 volts, so let's power up. There we go, have clock, turn on. We have VU meter indication, so let's try putting the tape in. Oh, that was quick, and yep, that feels like that's gone down perfectly. Let's try eject. Oh, fast, but it worked. Yep, that's gone down, and it comes out perfectly. Yep, seems fine. Yep, so next thing to try is whether it can actually record and play back to tape. So I'll get some other equipment set up and we'll give that a try. Okay, now what I'm going to do is play an NTSC DVD on this DVD recorder while recording it on the VTC-MH5 in hi-fi stereo sound. I'll then rewind the tape and play that tape back, just really to see if the machine works. The DVD I'm going to be using is actually a copy of the Sony Beta Hi-Fi demo tape. That's obviously been downloaded off YouTube, and I've burnt that onto an NTSC DVD, so don't use this to judge the quality of the thing. This isn't to get an idea of the quality, this is just to see if the machine works. So without further ado, let's power up. So the Variac is pushing out 101.9 volts, that's fine. So let's power up. Yeah. Turn on. Load tape. Now I want this on external input. Like that. We'll bring the counter up, and it's already reset probably because it's been powered off. So I'll start recording on here, and I'll start the disc playing in here, and just let that run.
Sound has a look all its own, but it never looked like much on a home video cassette recorder because it never sounded like much. Until now, Sony introduces the biggest breakthrough in home video since we invented it, Sony Beta Hi-Fi. At last, a VCR that, hooked up to your stereo system, transforms the home video experience into the home theater experience and is fully compatible with all existing beta tapes. There's an incredible technological story behind it, but to really appreciate Beta Hi-Fi, just sit back, relax, and open your eyes and ears to a new world of home entertainment.
Right, so we'll stop that. Turn on memory and rewind. Right, I'll rejig the connections now, and I'll give you a direct feed of the playback, and we'll play that tape back and see what it's like. Okay, let's power up. Turn on. Counter. Okay, here we go. Right, I'll dim the lights so you can see the VU meters better. Here we go.
Sound has a look all its own, but it never looked like much on a home video cassette recorder because it never sounded like much. Until now, Sony introduces the biggest breakthrough in home video since we invented it, Sony Beta Hi-Fi. last, a VCR that, hooked up to your stereo system, transforms the home video experience into the home theater experience and is fully compatible with all existing beta tapes. There's an incredible technological story behind it, but to really appreciate Beta Hi-Fi, just sit back, relax, and open your eyes and ears to a new world of home entertainment.
Okay, there's a little bit of hi-fi buzz on there, wasn't there? But that could be that maybe the tracking was slightly out, or possibly heads need cleaning. That sounded pretty good, but the machine's basically working, isn't it? So, there we go. It's still got that problem where the power supply gets extremely hot and it doesn't seem to go off properly, so I'm not sure it's completely fault-free yet. I will have another look at it, but I think that'll do for now. Oh, I also want to try out the FM receiver as well, don't I? Tell you what, I'll do that in part 3. Thank you very much for watching.